From the Southeast Asian capital city of the Philippine Islands, Manila, I bid you good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it may be, wherever you may be residing at the moment, and that ranges from morning to afternoon to evening. This radio program covers all those time zones. It's called Coast to Coast AM. It talks about things that other radio programs don't dare talk about. Anyway, it's my honor and privilege to be escorting you through this weekend. This is the third of a three-day weekend for me. First, we will look at the depressing world news. It's always depressing. Let's see. Attacks have killed 44 in Iraq as Ramadan ends. Militants targeted police, recruits, and shoppers, rounding up last-minute sweets and delicacies Sunday for the feast to mark the end of the Ramadan holy month. The highlight of the Muslim year, at least 44 Iraqis were reported killed across the country. Great celebration. The White House is bracing, boy are they bracing, for guerrilla warfare. Not the military type, the political type on the home front. If Republicans should lose control of the House and the Senate, both, it's going to be rough. No question about it. It's going to be rough. And for some reason, the stock market just is in love with that idea. They just love having one party in control of the House and Senate and the other in control of the presidency. They just love it. Senator Barack Obama, now this is interesting, acknowledged Sunday that he was considering a run for the presidency in 2008, backing off previous statements he wouldn't do so. The Illinois Democrat said he could no longer stand by the statements he made after his 2004 election and earlier this year that he would serve a full 6-year term in Congress. Did he say anything about his lips being red? He said he would not make a decision until after the November 7th elections. Voters overwhelmingly approved the largest modernization plan in the 92-year history of the Panama Canal on Sunday. This is the Panamanians, of course, at this point, because we gave it back, backing a multi-billion-dollar expansion that'll allow the world's largest ships to squeeze, and that's what they'll have to do, squeeze through the shortcut between the seas. About 78% of Panamanians voted in favor of the expansion. So there you have it. Panama Canal is going to get bigger. Jane Wyatt. Oh, Father knows best, right? Jane Wyatt, the lovely, serene actress who for 6 years on Father Knows Best was one of TV's favorite moms, has died. She was 96 years of age. That's a pretty good life, I would say. She died Friday in her sleep of natural causes at her Bel Air home. Sorry to hear that. It makes you old as those you've known and loved come and mostly go. The arrest of tomb robbers has led archaeologists to the graves of 3 royal dentists, protected by a curse then hidden in the desert sands for thousands of years in the shadow of Egypt's most ancient pyramid. So they're still finding things by the pyramid. Now, I just got a fast blast from, let's see, who is it? Jonathan in London, England, all the way in London. He comments on the show and then says, it's been such a great pleasure to interact with a legend. He says, you're an icon in radio art. If you all can do anything for me, stop with the legend bit, will you please? You can write about that once I'm gone. And speaking of feeling old, this is the kind of thing that runs around the internet, but it sure as heck caught my attention as I was considering this legend stuff. The people born in 1987 are beginning college this fall, right now, across the nation. Born in 87, they're just going to college. Their lifetime has always included AIDS. Make you feel old? The CD was introduced the year they were born. They've always had an answering machine. Can you imagine that? They've always had an answering machine. They've always had cable. Jay Leno's always been on The Tonight Show to them. Popcorn has always been cooked in the microwave. They never took a swim, thought about Jaws. Oh, my God, I always did. They don't know who Mork was or where he was from. They never heard Where's the Beef, I'd Walk a Mile for a Camel, or De Plane, Boss, De Plane. They don't even have a clue how to use a typewriter. Those are the ones entering college right now. Good heavens. In a moment, we'll look at some of the rest of the news. This was promised yesterday. Here it is. Natasha, her name is Natasha Dominkina, I believe. She's a Russian. She has an extraordinary gift. And they call it a gift, which means she can quite literally see through people. Now, her story sounds like it has come straight out of the pages of some sort of science fiction comic book, but doctors have yet to disprove her amazing abilities. Natasha is able to look into people's bodies and correctly diagnose their medical problems without any help from an ultrasound or any x-ray equipment or anything like that. Her mother says that her daughter appeared to be like any other child as she grew up. Though she was very mature for her age, Natasha learned to do things more quickly than other children. She was able to talk at 6 months. By the time she was a year, she could recite Pushkin. At 3, she'd learned the alphabet and mastered how to operate a snowmobile. When she was 10, Natasha went into the hospital to have her appendix removed. There were complications, and it was discovered that cotton swabs had been left in her abdomen. Natasha then had a second operation to remove the swabs, and a month later she began to remark on the fact that she could see inside people. She told her mom what looked like a vacuum cleaner hose, 2 beans, and a tomato inside her. Titania believed that though Natasha didn't know the correct words, her daughter was describing Titania's intestines, kidneys, and heart. Now, at the Children's Hospital in her hometown in western Russia, doctors ran a whole battery of tests to find out if the little girl really did have X-ray vision. In one case, Natasha drew a picture of what she saw inside a doctor's stomach, making a dark spot precisely where he had an ulcer. She also disagreed with the diagnosis of a cancer patient, saying all she could see was a small cyst. Further tests on the woman involved proved Natasha was correct. Natasha then was brought to England by a national newspaper, and she successfully spotted all of the fractures and metal pins in a woman who had recently been in a car crash. The woman was fully clothed, had no visible signs whatsoever of how or where she might have been injured. Natasha is an icon in Russia. She receives dozens of phone calls a day, and people queue outside her parents' tiny flat to wait for consultations. She wants to go to medical school in Moscow so she can continue to help people. The only way her family could afford to send her to a university was to charge 400 rubles for each consultation. But here is a young lady who, quite obviously, has a proven ability to do what other human beings cannot do. And if there's one, there have got to be more. There have got to be other humans that have abilities that, well, I guess to many of us would be considered superhuman. Perhaps they're not really superhuman. Perhaps they're latent in all of us. I don't know. But in my opinion, that is the beginning of a superhuman trait. And I think there are going to be others, and I think that as time goes on, more and more humans are going to be born with abilities that we would regard as superhuman. It may be evolution, or it may be something else. I really don't know, but I think it is occurring. Humanity, in fact, may split into 2 subspecies in about 100,000 years, as, by the way, was predicted by H.G. Wells. But this is a new expert. Evolutionary theorist Oliver Curry of the London School of Economics, very well respected, expects a genetic upper class and a dim-witted underclass to emerge. The human race would peak, he says, in the year 3000 before a decline due to dependence on technology. People would become choosier about their sexual partners, causing humanity to divide into some sort of subspecies. The descendants of the genetic upper class would be tall, slim, healthy, attractive, intelligent, and creative, and a far cry from the underclass humans who would have evolved into dim-witted, ugly, squat, goblin-like creatures. I think that division is already beginning, but that's just my opinion. This email I thought was very, very interesting, and it was just received before airtime, as so many of the really interesting ones are. Not a ghost story, Art, but maybe you'd be interested in hearing about the time that I was in Japan with the 25th Infantry and saw a werewolf. Now, the 25th deploys to Japan on a regular basis. In the fall of '87, my unit, the 127th Infantry, had just finished up in the field, or FTX part of the deployment, and was about to spend our last night in the field. We were in the shadow of Mount Fuji near a town which he can't pronounce. Being the junior NCO, I was charged with Sergeant of the Guard duty within our platoon on the last night of an FTX. The NCOs pulled guard duty, so the platoon sergeant took the first shift, and I took the last shift from 0300 to 0500. That would be 3 to 5 in the morning. We used a thermal imaging night scope for security, not NVGS, night vision goggles, but rather a high-power sight that was able to see very clearly in the dark up to 5,000 meters. My platoon was deployed in the wood line with approximately 400 meters of grass field to our front, a dirt road that was parallel to our position, and after that, a steep wooded hillside behind the road. The field we were in was about 600 meters wide. It was a very boring guard shift. And I was keeping myself awake and alert by looking through the night scope when I saw a very, very big dog trotting down the road to my front, from the right to my left. And I mean a very, very big dog, about 150, 175 pounds, looked kind of like a shaggy German shepherd. Well, as the dog reached the end of my field of vision to the left, it walked behind a tree and immediately, I mean instantaneously, changed into what looked like a man in a loose-fitting, hairy bodysuit, who then proceeded to climb up the really steep hill on all fours. I followed the man up the hill till he was out of sight, then quickly moved the sight back to the bottom of the hill and looked in vain for any sign of the dog. I called the unit to our left and asked if they'd observed anything out of the ordinary, was told nothing to report. So I spent the rest of my shift locked and loaded with bayonet fixed, waiting for the werewolf to come back. Didn't see the dog or anything else. Nothing out of the ordinary for the rest of the night, but my platoon sergeant did ask me why, when I woke the rest of the platoon at first call, I had the bayonet fixed firmly on my M16. So take it for what it's worth. Report of a werewolf sighting. UFOs. Past 2 years have seen autumn sightings of unidentified lights in the night skies over Tinley Park and the surrounding area. And a local UFO investigator says the truth is out there. According to Sam Moranto, I believe it is, of the Illinois chapter of the Mutual UFO Network, there have been more sightings recently. The sightings in Tinley were very important, he says, and we've had more in recent weeks. So Illinois with a spate of sightings, also Mexico. The dynamic of UFO sighting events following Exopolis incident took a new course last week with yet another mass sighting of UFOs. In fact, an entire fleet of UFOs over Mexico City, an event that caused considerable commotion and many reports from witnesses even during a daily TV show broadcast. The information and details on this new incident were released by journalist-researcher Jaime Maussan, you know him, during the radio show Los Grandes Misterios. That was last Sunday, going all the way now back to July 3rd, actually, as part of continuous coverage of UFO incidents that followed Exopolis event. So Mexico City continuing to have all kinds of UFO sightings. So UFO sightings, a lot of times you don't hear about something going on. Doesn't mean it's not going on. It's happening. It just doesn't hit, it just occasionally, for reasons that I've been unable to identify, suddenly hits the mainstream press. The mainstream press decides perhaps they need a kicker, for the hour or something, and they suddenly include a UFO report. Because you don't hear them most of the time does not mean they're not going on. All right, we are going to fill up the remainder of this hour with open line calls. So if you know the number, you are welcome to now join us. Next hour is Stephen Schwartz. Stephen Schwartz is a remarkable man, but he's got one hell of a job tonight. He's going to be talking, apparently, about the mysterious properties of water. That's right, water. Now, when I originally looked at this, I thought, how are we going to talk about water? How in the world are we going to talk about water for any period of time? But apparently that is what we're going to do, and knowing him, he will make it interesting. We shall see. First time caller line, you are on the air. Good morning.
Hey, Art, how you doing this morning?
Just fine, sir.
Oh, man, I got a ghost story for you. I've waited 30 years to tell this.
30 years?
Yes, sir. In 1970s, I worked with a seismograph company out of Oklahoma, and we worked all over the eastern side of the United States, and we were in Pennsylvania for quite a while. And my hometown is in Columbia, Mississippi, and we got a break to go home, so we come in, and I got into town about 2:00 in the morning, and there was this guy. Him and his brother were kind of mental. Everybody said, but this guy sat on the courthouse square, and he'd yell at everybody when they come by, and he'd wave, and yell at them.
Somewhat mentally challenged, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what some of the people said. He seemed to be a hard-working guy. He just was friendly. But anyway, about 2:00 in the a.m., I come by, and he was sitting there on the courthouse square like he always does, and I waved at him and hollered, and he yelled and hollered at me, and I went on out to my dad's house, and we talked for a while, and I was telling my dad about it, and I said, yeah, I saw Lawrence sitting on the courthouse square. My dad kind of got a little white, He goes, I don't think so, because he died about 3 months ago.
Oh, my God. And, well, that is a real ghost story.
Yes, sir. I was afraid to tell him. One afraid he'd think I was off my rocker,
Mm-hmm. Well, it's pretty typical of a lot of ghost stories, sir. People seem to, if they remain on Earth after they've passed on, they do seem to remain in the area that they occupied when they were alive. So, not a surprise.
Not at all. And I appreciate it, Art, for you taking my call. I love your show every night, and you have some of the greatest guests in the world.
You take care, bud.
Thank you, sir.
There you have it. That is a very typical ghost story. And speaking of ghost stories, I will be here for the annual tradition of Ghost to Ghost AM. Now, I suppose I might as well make my little plea right now. When we do Ghost to Ghost AM, it's not a joke. It's not funny. And the whole subject of ghosts and life after death is not funny. And so we don't mess around. I mean, when we say we want ghost stories, we want good ones. And particularly scary ones are most welcome. I guess they're all scary. I mean, if you see a ghost, it's going to just scare the hell out of you, generally. But I want the very best stories. So when I say take a moment or two between now and Ghost to Ghost and rehearse what you're going to say, I'm not suggesting that you make it up. Indeed not. I'm simply suggesting that you rehearse how you're going to tell the story. Because a lot of times, when you get on the air, if you're not used to being on the air, you sort of lock up and get nervous and forget half of what you're going to say. So a good way to get your points across is to write them down. Just make a brief outline, sort of a word or two of each part of the story that you want to tell, and write that on a piece of paper. And then when you get on the air, I think you'll find it's very easy to progress and just let the story unwind. And if you get nervous, you look down, and there it is. West of the Rockies, you have achieved airtime. Hello.
Hi, Art.
Hello.
Yeah, I was wondering what you thought about ghosts wearing clothes, because it's not like the clothes have souls or anything.
It's not like, say that again, it's not like what?
it's not like the clothes have like souls. You know what I mean?
The clothes have souls?
No, it's not like they do. So I don't understand why the ghosts wear clothes.
Well, not so it wouldn't offend you, I suppose. I don't know.
Oh, that's what.
I really do. Actually, it's a fairly decent question when you get right down to it, isn't it? Why do ghosts wear clothes? That is a good question. Why would anybody wear clothes in the afterlife? I wonder. Maybe because that's our expectation, which leads back to it could be in, our minds kind of thing. We wouldn't be all that accepting of a totally naked ghost. Well, I suppose depending on the form, right? From Manila in the Philippines, I'm Art Bell. Good morning. Hadn't thought about it, but Michael in New York regarding clothes on ghosts having nothing to do with souls reminds us all that, well, what about shoes? Hey, by the way, 2020 did a special on how the human race may be wiped out. Did you happen to catch that? Heart-stopping computer graphics, it said, will fill the gaps as scientists explain one after another how we'll perish in mountains of ash, mile-high tsunamis, perhaps be fried, radiated, or smashed by asteroids. The special thoughtfully counts down 7 doomsday threats that could wipe out humanity. Number 1, a gamma-ray burst, followed by a black hole. They're working on that one. Runaway artificial intelligence, a supervolcano that's overdue by now. For example, Yellowstone, an asteroid's impact, a nuclear weapon explosion, plague, or bioterrorism, and, of course, global warming. You would not have been had to have been listening too hard to understand. I'm over here in the Philippine Islands, and a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I read to you one of the great delicacies here in the Philippines was described by a British journalist, and I'll keep this very brief, who had been here for about 6 years now. It's called balut, and balut is well, let me use his words. There's one key step on the road to a full assimilation here in the Philippines that I have yet to take, and that's to eat balut. The day any of you sees me eating balut, please call immigration and ask them to immediately issue me a Filipino passport, because at that point there is no turning back. Balut, for those still blissfully ignorant non-Pinoys out there, is a fertilized duck egg. It is commonly sold with salt in a piece of newspaper, much like English fish and chips. By street vendors, usually after dark, presumably, so you can't see how gross it is. It's meant to be an aphrodisiac, although I cannot imagine anything more likely to dispel sexual desire than crunching on a partially formed baby duck swimming in noxious fluid. The embryo in the egg comes in varying stages of development, but basically it is not considered macho to eat one without fully discernible feathers, beak, and claws. Some say the crunchy bits are the best. Others prefer to just drink the so-called soup, the vile, pungent liquid that surrounds the aforementioned feathery fetus. Excuse me while I go throw up. Well, I hear from a lot of Americans married or about to be married to Filipinos, and Sal writes to me, I currently reside in Zephyr Hills, Florida, about 32 miles northeast of Tampa. Been a regular listener to Coast to Coast for the last 8 years. Didn't call me a legend, thank you. And on one of your recent programs, you talked about your introduction to balut. That made me smile and chuckle as I remembered my own experience back in January of 96. I flew to General Santos City in southern Mindanao to marry my fiancée. I was there for a month. One evening, as we were sitting around talking with various family members, she presented me with a balut. It was not swimming in any of that noxious fluid you talked about on your show. It was in a cardboard container, like kind of what you'd get with a hamburger. Even though I enjoy most Filipino food, I must tell you I'm not an adventurous eater, so you can imagine my immediate reaction and my facial expression upon beholding the balut. I remember her distinctly saying, somewhat mischievously, "You don't have to eat it if you don't want to." I looked over to my left, and there sat my future father-in-law, intently staring at me to see what I would do. And at that moment, I knew what had to be done. I could not be another wimpy foreigner. I could not fold in disgrace. I felt the combined weight of all those who had failed and come before me, slinking off into the darkness while the locals smiled knowingly about the lack of intestinal fortitude so prevalent among foreigners in general and Americans in particular. So, I ate it, yolk and all. And to my surprise, it was not bad. Kind of tasted like a salty boiled egg. I can just imagine, his about to be father-in-law just sitting there staring at it. That's exactly how it works. The other day, you may recall, I went and got my Philippine amateur radio permit. There's an agreement between the Philippines and the United States. We issue permits to them. They issue permits to us as long as we're licensed in our respective countries. Anyway, where I went, there was a balut vendor, and Erin picked up 2 balutes and carried them with her back home and then ate them, thankfully, out of my sight. Beaks and claws, there's just no way. There's just no way. I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it may even be an aphrodisiac. But given a choice, hand me the little blue pill. First-time caller line, you are on the air. Hello.
Hi, Art.
Hi.
How you doing? This is Zach from Madison Heights, Virginia.
Yes.
And I want to talk about being invisible.
Okay.
If I was invisible, I would use it and sneak into Area 51.
Yeah, that was my choice, too. I'd really like to know for sure, without question, what is there. And that'd be... I'm not sure being invisible, though. You would still have physical mass, buddy. So, in other words, they've got sensors all over the place. At least, you would have physical mass because the ability to see you would be gone. The light would be bent or in some way changed, I suppose, magnetically so that it simply wouldn't be seen. But after I thought it over, I thought, no, you'd get caught anyway because you'd still have mass, and they have very, very good sensors there, and you'd probably end up in a very visible jail of some kind or another. West of the Rockies, you are on the air. Hello.
Hello, Art. My name is Nathan. I'm from Oregon, and I wanted to ask you about ham radio.
Okay.
It's something I've wanted to try. I've never done it before. I'm 17. I'm still in high school. And I was wondering if you had any pointers for me.
I do. Look, there is no hobby. Ham radio has enriched my entire life. It is probably the reason that I'm here right now. It got me into radio. It got me into electronics. It got me almost every job that I had as an adult. It's a fraternity. And you will meet other hams after you get it. It's a blast. It's as much fun as a person can have. Now, I know that in the age of the Internet, people say, oh, baloney, come on. You can talk to people all over the world on the Internet and even see their face. And it's true. But it does not, I repeat, does not compare with the magic of your voice traveling from your antenna to the ionosphere, back to Earth, back to the ionosphere, and thusly around the world. Being able to talk to people through the air, sir, is magic. Now, pointers, there's lots of used equipment on the market that you don't have to spend a whole lot of money on. Uh-huh. Antennas are easy and cheap, or they can be expensive, as can be the equipment, either cheap or expensive. Find a radio club in your area. Almost every area has one. They will get you in a class, and before you know it, you'll be on your way. You'll have a federal license, and you'll be on the air.
Yeah, because ever since I've started listening to you, I just heard you talk about this ham radio, and it just sounds so fascinating. And I love studying electronics and radio and the ionosphere, and it's just so interesting to me. And
then, buddy, that's the path for you. Just find a club in your area. They'll take it from there.
Thank you. It's been an honor speaking to you.
Take care. He almost said something like legend. I want everybody to drop that, please. I do not want to be thought of, or at least referred to, as a legend. And every time they write a newspaper article about me now, it's always legend, legend, legend. Really does make one feel, after I'm gone, then you can use that word. First, make that the wild card line. You're on the air. Hello.
Hi, Art. This is Blair in Sedona, Arizona.
Hey, Blair.
Hey, you're a pretty good talk show host that has a fairly good listening ear, and sometimes you have great shows and sometimes they're mundane. You're just as human as the rest of us are.
That's right.
And I wanted to talk about David Sarita's prediction that NASA already knows about the ozone situation and that there's two scientists, if I may.
Oh, hey, I'm glad you brought up ozone. Have you been to the website tonight yet?
That's why I'm calling. That's the first thing I saw.
I saw that a few days ago, Bud, and I went, oh, my God, I've got to get that up on the website. So I sent it in, and there it is. But that's a pretty big chunk of the world there, partner.
Well, I remember in 2001 you had Dan Aykroyd and David Sarita on, and it was starting to shrink. David Sarita was making a claim that certain ice balls were coming down, replenishing the ozone. And here we go, 5, 6 years later, it's starting to expand again.
Yeah, this is bad.
Yeah.
No question about it, really bad.
Yeah, well, there's Joseph Nust of the Goddard Space Center and Louis A. Frank, who is the National Space Act award-winning astrophysicist, both agree that there's something coming down. They're seeing ultraviolet photons, which are invisible to the naked eye, and they're detecting ice balls. And they're both, I guess, work with NASA, but I'm not hearing about this from NASA. And I was wondering if a Richard Hoagland could jump on this or something.
Well, somebody should, because it is absolutely gigantic. It's just monstrous. So if you get an opportunity, just stroll up to coasttocoastam.com and take a look at the size, the record size, I might add, of the ozone hole. Now, I had been hearing from scientists that because of our avoidance of CFCs and that sort of thing into the air, the ozone hole would be repairing itself, and it began to look like it was doing so, but my God, look at the size of the hole right now. It will produce more cancers. It will produce all kinds of trouble. Now that, when they're talking about a hole, they're talking about an area virtually bereft of any ozone, kind of like the dead holes in the ocean. There's just no ozone. And so the sun and the radiation that causes things like melanoma cancer just come pouring right through. In case you didn't know, there was a law in Australia now that school children have to wear headgear on the way to school and on the way home from school because it's simply too dangerous. But take a look at that. Remember, that little green ball represents the Earth, one whole view of the Earth. So that hole that you see is proportionate. And it's gigantic. And if that doesn't scare you, then I don't know what would. All the way from Florida on a wild card line, Paul, you're on the air.
Hey, Art. I love your show. I love listening to you. I can't stay up every night and listen to you, but tonight I was listening to you, and I thought I'd give you a call.
Well, thank you.
I had an experience, me and my wife, about 15 years ago. I'm not going to tell how old we are, but interesting experience that some of your listeners might want to think about. We had in our house, my wife and I were in bed, and the house exploded, and there was this huge flash of light, and the walls blew out. And my wife screamed, and I like telling this story because my wife is witness to this, just not me alone. And the house exploded inside, and I jumped out of bed, ran to my children's room to get them, and they were fine. And as I was walking through, I noticed the house, the walls were still up. And I went to the phone, I dialed 911, I dialed the 911 number and told them that there was an explosion at our house. And they said that the fire department had already been notified and was sent out. And we could hear the sirens coming down the street, right. And they would come down our street and didn't see an explosion, and went the next street and to the next street looking for this explosion.
All right. When you say explosion, sir, can you nail it down for me a little bit? In other words, you were in bed. Is this something you just heard, or you describe exactly what you felt and saw?
Well, I was asleep. My wife was asleep.
Right.
And I woke up screaming. This huge flash, white flash, went off in the room. And my wife was screaming too. The house felt like it was exploding. And I opened our door and ran out to look for the children. I was thinking the walls would be gone, the roof would be gone.
Right.
And the house was still intact.
Okay.
Which I couldn't understand.
All right, so now back to the sirens.
Well, we called the 911, and they dispatched the fire department.
Right, they couldn't find the explosion.
They couldn't find the explosion. And I thought, this is so strange. And I thought, was this something of our imagination? So this really gets strange. After, you could hear the sirens going up and down different streets.
Oh, wait a minute. It couldn't be your imagination, because you said when you called 911, they said they'd already been dispatched.
Right. They had calls from other neighbors that there was an explosion in the neighborhood.
Got it.
And we went back to bed, and I thought, everything's fine. I don't know where this flash came from. So the next day before I went to work, I went down the driveway, and an elderly lady next door to us, she opened the window, and she said, Paul, she goes, your house exploded last night. She said there was such an unusual flash coming out of your house. And I said, we seen it too. She said, well, we seen it, and it lit up her house. And she said the house exploded also. And there was not a thing wrong. I have no idea what really happened in there, but there was this tremendous flash inside this house.
Got it. That is some story. Yeah, I've got it, Paul. That is an amazing story. I have no idea what that could have been. I'm sitting here actually trying to consider what that might have been. That's really a strange one. Wow. Fourth wildcard line from New York. You're on the air.
Hello?
Yes. Hello, Richard.
Oh, hey, Art. How you doing? Great show last night. I just wanted to call you up and thank you for having that lady on the air. You've got to have her on the air more and have her tell more of those stories like that pancreas.
Amazing lady, yeah.
That was amazing. Dr. Janice something or other. But she was great. At any rate, I think I know why ghosts wear clothes.
Okay.
Okay, you ready for this? If somebody, you'd have to buy into a couple of things. I'm not going to go through the whole philosophy of it, but if somebody, assuming first of all there are many different realities, one which we're talking in right now, one that extends beyond us, in the grave, and ultimately one with a Godhead. So if somebody is at a level of spiritual development where they choose to manifest themselves as a ghost to a loved one or somebody that, they care to be seen by,
right.
Assuming that they did this, I would think they would be very close as far as emotional, spiritual, mental development to, where they were at when they walked the earth plane. With me so far?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So if the guy was not a streaker in real life, then he's not going to be a streaker as a ghost. And
I think that's right. I really think that's right.
If he's going to manifest, bones and flesh and a physical body, then he's going to, I got to get off this other phone before it junks out.
Oh, thank you for that. You sound so much better.
Oh, yeah, because that phone has a weak battery, and in a few seconds it'll just be nothing but static. At any rate, if he chooses to manifest himself in physical form, if he's going to manifest bones and flesh, and, why not manifest clothing too? There shouldn't be a big deal.
Other than that, why? Well, all right. For example, I'm in a tropical climate where I am right now. The Philippine Islands are definitely tropical, not that far from the equator. Why do people wear clothes? Certainly, you don't need them here, temperature-wise. One might suggest you need them to stay warm, right? Well, not here. If anything, they make you warmer than you ought to be. It's already very warm. So let's scratch our heads about that a little bit and wonder why people in tropical climates wear clothes at all.
That's strange, but I think it's good, the same as the rest of the human race. There's been a false sense of modesty and shame inculcated in them. Because you go into any underdeveloped country like Africa or something, and the people usually don't wear clothes. South America in the jungles,
Well, yes, but they even cover up a little bit.
Sometimes, but sometimes not. I mean, I've seen these National Geographic programs, and
we've all seen those. Yeah, that's true. All right, listen, bud, I've got to take off. We're at the top of the hour.
So try and get her back on again, Art. She was great.
Oh, she was great. No question about it. Yes. Clothing. Why? Is it just modesty? Is that the only reason we wear clothes? I'm Art Bell. Well, I'll tell you, folks, if you can see me, you really can see 4 kilometers. See, I'm converting. Good morning, I'm Art Bell, and this is Coast to Coast AM. Coming up in a moment, this is going to be a challenge, I think, for Stephen Schwartz. Stephen Schwartz, Research Associate of Cognitive Science Laboratory of the Laboratories for Fundamental Research, is one of the world's leading experts on practical applications of remote viewing, as well as other aspects of extraordinary human functioning. For almost 20 years, he was the research director and chairman of the Mobius Society. The laboratory carried out research into remote viewing, creativity, therapeutic intent, and other areas of human performance. He is the co-author of over 30 technical papers, 4 books, numerous magazine pieces. Stephen is editor of the Schwartz Report, an international daily web publication. He is a former Special Assistant for Research and Analysis to the Chief of Naval Operations, editor of Sea Power magazine, and staffer of National Geographic Societies, founder of the Society for Anthropology of Consciousness, the International Remote Viewing Association, and the International Society for the Study of Subtle Energies and Energy Medicine, and is a member of the Parapsychology Association. Now, having studied human abilities, perhaps he'd be one to comment on this young Russian gal we talked about a little while ago. In a moment, Stephen Schwartz. Stephen Schwartz, welcome back to Coast AM, buddy.
How are you, Art? I haven't talked to you in a while.
I'm very well indeed. And before we launch into the world of water, I'd kind of like to ask you, since it sort of seems to be down your alley a little bit, I don't know if did you happen to catch the first hour of the program?
I did not. I was working to do the Schwartz Report, which I had to have published before your interview.
Okay. I'm going to just roll over this very quickly, and because I want your comments on it.
Sure.
The gal's name is Natasha Demkinina, Demkina. She's a Russian gal. And she has quite a gift. Since she was quite young and went through a couple of operations, she began to acquire a talent to be able to see into people's bodies, telling her mother at one point that she saw something like a vacuum cleaner hose, a couple of beans, and a tomato. Her mother thought that she was looking at her intestines, kidneys, and heart, and that's how it began. Then, at the Children's Hospital in her hometown, doctors ran a battery of tests to find out if the little girl really did have X-ray vision. In one case, she drew a picture of what she saw inside one of the doctor's, or the doctor's stomach, marking a dark spot exactly where he had an ulcer, then disagreed with the diagnosis of a cancer patient, saying all she could see was a small cyst. Further tests on the woman proved she was correct. Then, thinking this just might be a Russian, one of those odd, weird stories coming out of Russia. No, they brought her to England. A national newspaper brought her to England. She successfully spotted every single one of the fractures and metal pins in a woman who had recently been in a car crash. The woman was fully clothed, had no visible signs of how or where she had been injured. They know all about this young gal in Russia, and so there seems to be no question about it. This young lady has the ability to look inside people's bodies. Now, I don't know what that represents. It may represent the beginning. I've been hearing more and more stories like this. Now, I don't know if that means that humans are beginning to change, or we're getting more people with more of what we would call superhuman abilities, or what the hell's going on, but I believe the stories, Stephen. Any comments?
Well, this is a form of remote viewing. Why this particular form of remote viewing started with this child, I can't say. I'd be interested to know, for instance, if she had medical problems when she was younger.
It's interesting you would ask that. Let me stop you right. By the way, what kind of phone are you on?
I'm on I'm on a corded phone that I bought for Coast to Coast.
I see. All right.
Does it not sound good?
Well, it's not the best I've heard. You might get good and close to it.
Well, I'm close. I can try another phone.
All right. If you want to do that, sure. I'm always willing to listen to another phone just to hear what
hold on.
the difference.
Let me go get one. Just a second.
This is always worth a try. And by the way, this applies to all the rest of you out there, folks. Try and stay away from cell phones. God, I hate cell phones. Even though I must add I own one and I'm contemplating the purchase of another. I wouldn't call a radio show with one. Let's
How is
see.
this? Is this better?
It is indeed.
Okay. There
yes,
you go.
I like it. I like it much better. All right, now. When she was very young, I left this part of the story out. She had her appendix removed.
Right.
Now, nothing special, but there were complications when she discovered a couple of cotton swabs had been left in her abdomen. Then a second operation to remove the cotton swabs. A month later, it was immediately after that she began to acquire this ability, Stephen.
Okay, that's exactly where I was going. My guess is people tend to specialize in their focus for opening to non-local consciousness, and this is often involved with some kind of an emotional or traumatic event that happens, and they use their own personal experience as a kind of entry point. George McMullen, for instance, who's probably the best archaeological remote viewer in the world, focused on archaeology not only because he had an interest, but because the first person who ever took him seriously was Norman Emerson, who was the founding father of Canadian archaeology. So I'm not surprised at all that she focused on what we would actually call intuitive diagnosis. This is a form of remote viewing. It's actually one of the easier forms to learn, although she seems to be particularly gifted. In the book I've got coming out, Opening to the Infinite, I talk a little bit about this and teach people how to do it because, surprisingly enough, it's not as difficult as you would think. I mean, to give you an example, you and a friend can draw a little simple outline of a human body, and you get a third party to fill in on that part places where they have had some kind of injury or medical events, and they fold that up and put it away, and then you take another one of those same little outlines, and you, knowing nothing about what they have said or done, this is a stranger, and you then go over their body and you try to open yourself to this, and you'll be surprised at how accurately you can do this. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to be as good as this young girl, because first of all, she's a child, and her intellectual mind hasn't told her that she can't do this. Plus, she's had a traumatic event, which, I mean, something being left in your body is about as traumatic as I can think of. And so you may not have the same kind of accuracy and abilities that she has, but the capacity to do intuitive diagnosis is a remarkably robust one amongst the things that people do with remote viewing.
Stephen, that then begs a question. Do you suppose there might be some way that we could promote these abilities in a person by... I have no idea what, Stephen, but you said that a traumatic event would begin this, and sure enough, I hadn't told you that part of the story. There was a traumatic event. So could we come up with something that would spark these abilities in a person?
Yeah, you don't have to have a traumatic event. Look, this is opening to non-local awareness. This is something that you are doing all the time anyway. It's just that you are not conscious of it. It has not surfaced into your conscious mind. This capacity to open to what I describe as non-local consciousness is a virtually universal ability. It's not something you learn. What you learn is how to suppress the mentation, the intellectual activity, the cognitive activities that you have going on, so that you can allow this rather weak voice to be heard. And there are a number of ways you can do that. The gold standard course that we've done, the DVD course, teaches people how to do this. There are a number of books that are out there, not only mine, but other people's, This is a learnable skill. It's like a kind of modern mental martial art or a kind of mental yoga, and it is an ancient one. It's in the shamanic traditions. There are all over the world. There are traditions of training people to be able to use this aspect of consciousness to open themselves to it. It's like learning to play tennis, basically. There's nothing supernatural or weird about it. It's not anomalous. All those words that people use, anomalous, weird, I don't even like the word psychic. It's just non-local consciousness, and it's something that we all have by reason of being living organisms.
And do you believe, Stephen, that this ability is something that is increasing now as we, as a human race, continue to evolve? Or I guess your answer is that no, it's something that we've always had and once was much more prevalent in human beings, I guess before television and the internet and all that stuff that takes our attention elsewhere. So it's something ancient that's really being just sort of revived?
I would say to you, Art, that it is your birthright as a human being. And by way of analogy, let me give you two specific examples. In hunter-gatherer cultures, pre-technological cultures, knowing where the gazelle is in the forest is the difference between eating and starving for you and your family group. Those people that were particularly good at finding the gazelles, their family group got to eat, and their gene pool continued, and the people who weren't very good at that task, their gene pool died out because they starved to death. So this has something that has been evolutionarily selected in a sense, and in its modern context, you can see exactly this, for instance, in the CEOs of corporations. If you Douglas Dean and John Michalowski at the Newark Technological Institute some years ago did a task where they asked CEOs of corporations to predict, to make predictions, and to guess a sequence of numbers. And they discovered that those CEOs, they had all been in office for 5 years, so they put their stamp on the company. Those CEOs who scored above chance, their corporations doubled or better their profits. Those CEOs who scored at chance, their companies had remained pretty much the same. And those who had scored below chance, what in the field we call missing, which is it's a kind of suppression process. Yes. Their corporations had lost money. In a sense, you could say profits make profits. It's exactly the CEO of a modern corporation and the lead hunter of an ancient hunter-gatherer group are essentially accessing the same part of consciousness.
Yeah, I think you're right on target, Stephen. Life is nothing but a continuing trail of decision making, go right, go left, go right, go
That's
left.
Right.
And the people who are able to pay attention to their generally first impression of what to do and follow that, the old famous gut feeling.
That's right.
Seem to do very well.
That's right. We call it gut feeling or woman's intuition or, a little voice told me or those kinds of euphemisms that we use. But the reality is that this ability is always present because it is a function of being a living organism. My personal belief is that we began to suppress overt representation of these abilities with the rise of the industrial state about 500 years ago, the technological state, maybe that's a better way to put it, or the scientific state, because we began to see that as somehow antithetical to intellectual activity, and so we learned to suppress it. And particularly even earlier when we had begun to move into urban groupings, I think people suppressed it because, do you really want to know as you're walking down the street what everybody thinks about your haircut? Well, of course not. So people close that part of themselves off to provide a kind of psychological privacy. but almost every culture, particularly pre-industrial culture, had some kind of school or tradition or pathway where people who had a particularly strong ability at this sort of thing were identified and cultivated and trained. You find it in every culture across the spectrum of human activity.
You don't think, then, that it's necessarily increasing along with, I guess from our perspective, slow process of evolution?
Well, increasing, if it's increasing, the difference is, I think, probably quite incremental. I think we are relearning how to open to this part of ourselves. You know, in the past, again, pre-technologically, the only way this could be expressed was in religious terms. I mean, and if you look at, for instance, Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream in the Bible, I mean, we would call that today a kind of precognitive dream analysis. At the time, of course, they didn't have those concepts, they didn't have those words. So the only way you could describe a precognitive dream, for instance, was to say that God spoke to you, or that the gods spoke to you, or that, you know, some other divine being was speaking to you, because they didn't have science. They didn't have any, they just literally lacked the language to express it in any other than religious spiritual traditions. And it comes all the way up. If you look at Paul's description of the gift of the Spirit, I mean, it looks like the sort of thing you see in any parapsychological laboratory in the world today. It's just that it was framed in religious context because that was really the only way people could think about it.
Well, Stephen, if what she can do is real, and I'm convinced it is, and obviously you are, then there has got to be a way that science can say, all right, it's testable, it's repeatable, it's real. Now let's find out what the hell it is. In other words, in some way that science has yet to understand, she is able to look inside the body of a person, identify all kinds of things. Now, we would call that X-ray vision.
Yes, but I would call it, you see, non-local awareness. Remote viewing is a protocol. It's a technique for doing this. There are many techniques for doing this.
I know, Stephen, but science doesn't know how the hell it's done. There's got to be a technical explanation for how this occurs.
No, we don't have. We do not have a model for it, but one is emerging. That's the interesting thing. There is a big change occurring, and what's happening is that the idea of non-local consciousness is being expressed now. If you look at the research literature being published in a half a dozen disciplines, and I'm speaking here, for instance, of the 2,000-plus therapeutic intent studies that have been published involving what we would call healing in a traditional sense. Although some people think of it in religious terms, some people think of it in secular terms. So I would call it therapeutic intent, the idea that the consciousness of one person can have an effect on the well-being of another organism or even of a mechanism. If you look at in biology, for instance, and if the papers that are beginning to come out now about what is called entanglement between large insect colonies or flights of birds or schools of fish, they have eliminated all the other possible explanations, and the papers are beginning to come out now that are talking about the idea that there's some kind of linkage between all of the fish in the school of fish, and that essentially they're moving as a single organism.
Absolutely no doubt about any of that. But again, they have no idea how it's achieved. You know, with radio, we can measure the waves, the frequency, and know how it propagates. With this communication, with this communication, we don't have a clue.
Well, we know certain things about it, though. I mean, I agree with you. We don't know the mechanism by which it works. It's even hard to talk about. Part of the problem is that our language is embedded in time-space.
Stephen, hold tight. We're at the bottom of the hour. Stephen Schwartz is my guest. This is Coast to Coast AM. There is so very much in this world, isn't there, that we don't understand. That doesn't mean it's not happening. That doesn't mean it's not real. As real as a heart attack. It is. These people can do these things. They can remote view. Remote viewing is real. There's no doubt about that. I've been interviewing remote viewers now for years. And the bar for me in believing that it's real got passed a long, long time ago. It is real. So, more investigation. And by the way, we came to talk about the secret world of water. Seems pretty pedestrian, doesn't it? But I think not. And we'll tell you all about it in a moment. Well, all right. When I got the word that we were going to be doing a show, Stephen, on water, I thought, this is going to be a crash. I mean, how much can you say about water? How secret can the world of water be?
Well, let me ask you this, Art. Do you believe that by consciousness alone you can change the molecular structure of water? Do you think that by consciousness alone, by thinking beautiful thoughts, you can change the crystallization of water? Because
I don't know if I believe that. I have not tried. Okay, you're saying they're true. I have not tried it. I believe in the power of consciousness. I'm sure, I know you're aware of the experiments I did, so I'm fully aware of the power of consciousness. But I'm not sure how I would test what I did to water. How would you do that?
Well, there are a number of these kinds of experiments. I will tell you one that I did myself, and then I'll tell you one involving that Dean Radin, who I know has been a guest on your show, has done following up Masaru Emoto's work. In the one that I did, we had 14 healers and 14 people randomly selected from a population of patients who were recipients of the healing. And of the 14 people we selected to be healers, 7 of them were practiced. That is, they had some technique. They defined themselves as healers, and they had some technique for doing it, everything from fundamentalist Christianity to channeling space people.
Okay.
And we asked them only to go in and do whatever it is they did. For those who had, the 7 who'd never done anything like this before, didn't believe it was possible, just literally people pulled in off the street, as it were. We explained to them to go in and hold healing thoughts and send healing energy, however that translated in their mind, to the people that they were healing. They could do anything they wanted. They just couldn't manipulate them or probe them or, do anything that was intrusive in that way.
Okay.
And while they were doing this, we had little bottles of very pure sealed water sealed in little glass bottles. And they did this. There was a 5-minute bottle, then a 10-minute bottle, then a 15-minute bottle. And we videotaped all this and all that sort of thing. And then we used a technique called infrared spectrophotometry, which was where you take a little very thin film of water and you run infrared light through it, and then it produces a kind of chart. And we compared each of the little bottles, also had a control bottle. And so the null hypothesis, though, what was supposed to happen, according to the materialist view, would be that there would be no difference between the treated bottles, that is, the bottles the people had on their hands in a little cloth tube that was just tied in the back of their hand, while they were doing their healing, as compared to the control bottles. But in fact, all of the little treated bottles showed a change. We predicted where the change would be. It had to do with what's called the hydrogen bonding, and it showed a consistent, predictable change in the water that was exposed to the healing intention as compared to the control bottles, which were all exactly the same. They all came out exactly the same. The only bottles that showed any difference were the bottles which had been treated. And the only way they could have been changed was literally the consciousness of the people doing this.
Okay, that's certainly, that's very impressive. Now, can you pin down exactly for me what the change was?
Yes, exactly. The change was a measurement of a few wave numbers that relate to the bond which forms between individual molecules of water. You know, water is H2O, and so that's one little molecule of water. And there are the bonds that hold the hydrogen and the oxygen together to make the molecule work.
Yes,
and
sir.
then there is a second kind of bond which links the molecules together. That's called the hydrogen bond. And that bond either breaks and reforms or gains or loses strength. And there's arguments on the research community isn't clear which is which. It doesn't really matter from this point of view. So we predicted that the hydrogen bonding relationship would show a predictable change, which is influenced by the therapeutic intention when compared to the controls. And I also think, by the way, that this is how healing gets into the body, because there are about 130 papers. If anybody goes up to MedPub and does a search on hydrogen bonding and immune response, you will discover that this exact same bond relationship, when it changes in the water in your body, stimulates your immune response. And I think that is how I actually think there are two kinds of healing. It's kind of like dowsing. We have one term which may cover several phenomenon. There's map dowsing, where you're working on a map. Well, obviously, you can't be detecting any weak fields that might be present on the land because you're not on the land. Whereas dowsers who walk over the land, there is some argument that they may be people who are hypersensitive to weak field effects which are occurred by moving water. I don't know that that's the explanation. I just simply say that there may be two different conditions. And in the same way, I think there are two different conditions of healing that occur. There is a kind of miraculous healing, the kind of healing you see in Lourdes. And I went over to Lourdes and looked through their medical files. They're very meticulous. They have about, when I looked, which was some years ago, they had 84 cases of healing, and they were, I would call them miraculous.
I am really interested. I'm really interested in what you found at Lourdes. I've always been interested in that. I recently read a book about it, and so if you really went through all of that, what kind of thing did you find?
Well, what I found was that there were, as I'm describing, there were 84 cases of what I would call miraculous healing. That is, a child goes to sleep and in the morning wakes up and the kneecap that was not there is now there. I mean, I don't know how that happens. That we just have to call that miraculous healing. There is a second kind of healing, which is, I think, vastly the majority of healings, and that's where a person has something and they get a healing experience, and they either heal very quickly, or the headache goes away, or the pink eye subsides, or that kind of thing. And that kind of healing, I believe, occurs because the hydrogen bonding relationship in the water in their body is changed, and it has stimulated their own immune response. Now, interestingly, we also made the same kind of measurements with water that came from springs, which were traditionally and historically associated with healing, Lourdes being one of them,
right.
But not the only one. We looked at Glastonbury Tor, which has got a spring at the bottom, and one here in the United States. And when we did that, we saw that those springs had naturally formed exactly the same kind of change in the hydrogen bonding that we had seen in the water exposed to the healers.
That's fascinating.
And
Absolutely
I think that's why these springs... Now, by the way, the Lourdes water that you buy in the shops, that is snow melt that they gather in cisterns under the city. The actual Lourdes spring water it's not a very big spring, and so it doesn't put out millions of gallons of water. So that water is there's not enough of it to sell at the quantity that they're dealing with. So, but the actual spring water that Lourdes puts out, that Glastonbury spring puts out, that I'm trying to think of the name of this Indian spring that's just gone out of my head now. That's up in upstate New York. those springs showed the same changes in the hydrogen bonding relationship that we saw in the therapeutic intention studies.
Well, Stephen, our human bodies are what percentage of water? Mostly, right?
Well, we're born, we're about 70% water, and then an average adult is about 60%, and an average woman is about 55%. And the difference is that women have more fat in their bodies because evolutionarily they had to be able to endure. They were taking care of the children, so if there was a starvation period, they needed to have that little extra bit of oomph. So women have a little more fat in their bodies than men do, so they have a little less water.
Yeah, all of this is kind of making sense to me, and this small change that you're talking about,
yes,
stimulates, you're saying, the human immune system to produce.
I don't say that, as I'm saying. I'm not saying I do say that, but it's not on my authority that I'm saying it, because I have not done that particular part of research. What I did was I did the research on the water. And then it occurred to me that if the water in the palms of the hands of the therapeutic practitioners changed, that It was probable that the water in the body of the patient recipients changed. And I actually went over to UCLA Medical Library and began to plow through the journals. And lo and behold, I found, as I said, dozens of papers, mostly in the oncological literature. I don't know why, but cancer researchers got very interested in this, and particularly Japanese cancer researchers. And there were a number of papers describing the same change in the bonding relationship that we had seen, and they associated it with improved immune response, particularly the production of T8 cells.
Gosh. How many cases of one sort of cancer or another were documented as having been cured at Lourdes?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I could answer that. It's been so long since I looked at that stuff. All I can remember was there were 84 cases that I felt were absolutely ironclad. They really have, I went over thinking this was, it's a religious group and they want it to work, and so they're going to let a lot of stuff slide. No, quite the contrary. In the late 19th century, the medical establishment in France, at the request of the church, set up a committee which is empowered to examine these cases, to validate the claims, and they have an extremely rigorous, in fact, really, I was struck with how rigorous it was, an extremely rigorous process in which they validate these claims. And I came away with 84 that I thought were absolutely ironclad. And I was particularly struck by the fact that they were not the kind of healings that one traditionally associates with healers. They really were miraculous healings.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm aware of how strict they really are. I mean, as you point out, there is a committee, and if anything, they're probably too strict.
Yes, I think that's true.
Yeah, it is.
They really err on the side of dismissing claims because they don't want anybody to come forward and say, if you'd only considered this. So I think the probability is that there are a number of other things. Now, I need to say, Art, that at the same time, I think there is an unexplored aspect. I'm just beginning to get interested in thinking about how to do these experiments, but there is an unexplored aspect of this, and that is the healer healing you, or is the healer linking with you in non-local consciousness to stimulate your own body's immune response through a psychophysical self-regulation that's exactly the same as the placebo effect? In the placebo literature, which is this extraordinary literature that almost nobody ever talks about, because when you read a drug trial study, for instance, they just say 30 to 35% of the people did as well or better than the treated population, and then they go on and talk about the drug. What I was interested in was that 30 to 35%, because if somebody does as well as someone who's receiving the medication, several questions suggest themselves. For instance, if you have a pancreatic problem, most people couldn't even tell you where their pancreas was. So how is it that they know how to reach into their pancreas, not into their liver, not into their gallbladder? They reach into their pancreas and they stimulate it exactly as the drug stimulates it so that they produce an effect which is as good or better than the people getting the drugs.
Oh, you're exactly right, Stephen. The placebo effect, I always wondered what the exact percentage was. I thought it was closer to half, but you're saying 30 to 35%.
30 to 35% is in the literature.
That by itself is, as you point out, it's absolutely astounding, and everybody just glosses right over it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Extraordinary. And I think what's actually happening in healing is not that the healer's doing anything. That is, nothing's coming out of the healer. This is the part of the problem about thinking about this whole area is that we are trapped in time-space. And so we persist in thinking that there's something coming out of the healer, going into the healee, that there's some kind, that when we think about communication, we think there's got to be a sender and a receiver and some kind of signal. I don't think any of that is true. I think
I'm
all
kind
of
of stuck in that place. I'm a little stuck in that place myself because I'm a radio guy and I understand.
Interestingly enough, the people who originally created the idea of telepathy, mind-to-mind communication, many of them were pioneers in radio and telegraphy and telephony. And I believe that what happened was it was at a time when radio was just developing. These guys who were doing this research in radio and telegraphy and all the rest of it, that they just couldn't stand it, that they didn't have an explanatory model, and so they turned to the one that they knew. And they created the idea that there was some kind of, I don't know, anomalous walkie-talkie effect.
Mm-hmm.
And we have lived with that wrong model all of these years. If you think about it, telepathy is preposterous. How do you reach out and find an individual human mind out of the 6 billion human minds on the planet? And studies have shown that people can send messages in languages which the recipient does not speak, and yet the recipient can correctly describe the imagery that's in the message. So how does that happen? Well, I think what's going on is that we are opening an aspect of our consciousness exists outside of time-space, and that it is linked. Some physicists would now say that it was entangled. I'm not prepared to get into that fight, really, because I don't think we know yet, but definitely that they are linked. In fact, I think all of this research is telling us that all consciousness is interlinked and interdependent.
But can there be a link without entanglement? Many physicists would say no. I mean, they're already identifying the fact that some kind of communication occurs, but they're saying there has to be at some point an entanglement before that can happen, and then it can happen across time and space.
Yes, well, I mean, there are people in the physics community who argue that that since everything was created at the Big Bang, that since they were entangled at the beginning, everything must still be entangled. And so, I don't know. That doesn't really get me very far yet. So I don't really focus so much on that. I just think of it as linkage, because I don't know whether it's entanglement. I think it may be, and certainly people who are far more knowledgeable about the quantum mechanics of entanglement than myself believe that. But I'll just settle for linkage at the moment. I think the evidence is compelling and overwhelming that all consciousness is interlinked and interdependent.
Well, how confident, and you sound very, very confident, are you in the research that you've done to this point?
I'm very confident in the research that I've done. I mean, I've sent this out to people all over the world and asked them to tear it apart. And, I've had people make attempts at that, but they have never been able to take it on. I think there needs to be more research. I think we're just at the beginnings of it. I don't want to leave people with the idea that we have all the answers. We don't. Actually, we don't even have all the questions. I mean, part of the problem with this is knowing what questions to ask.
That's right. All right, Stephen, hold it right there. We're at the top of the hour. Stephen Schwartz is my guest. Very excited about this subject, and now I see why. Precious bodily fluids. Remember that? Some of you get a chuckle out of that. But you know what? Stephen Schwartz is making all kinds of sense here. Water makes up the majority of what's in all of our bodies, right? Water, we are water. And so if consciousness has an effect on water, then consciousness could have an effect on the water in our bodies. Therefore, what healers do, as he points out, may not be as we have traditionally imagined. In other words, not the healer somehow projecting into our body and creating some sort of change, but rather in cooperation with the healer. Oh, I'm never going to get it right. I know what I'm trying to say. The words just aren't making sense. But Stephen will. He'll be right back. Stephen Schwartz is obviously very excited about this, and I can see why. Muriel in Alvin, Texas asks, I think, a relevant question, Stephen. She says, well, I'd like to know what difference, if any, there was between the 5-minute, 10-minute, and 15-minute vials of water during the experiment.
That's an excellent question, Muriel. I asked exactly the same question. That's why there was a 5, 10, and 15-minute bottle. And the reason I asked that question is healers tell you that they heal all the time, that it's like a kind of constant flow. So presumably, the 15-minute bottle should have shown greater change than the 5-minute bottle. And in fact, that was not what happened. The 5-minute, the 10-minute, and the 15-minute bottle showed the same change, which suggests to us that healing is a pulsed, healing intention is a pulsed phenomena. That is, it's like everything else in your body. There's a build-up, a release, a relaxation, a build-up, a release, a relaxation, that same process. And to my surprise, the healers, although they think about that they're healing all the time, in fact, whatever this was, this linkage that occurred, it occurred in less than 5 minutes. But she's asked a very good question.
All right. Jim in Texas says, I disagree with your guest for the reason that every time I do a healing, if I don't do a cleansing for myself afterward, I get very ill.
Okay. As I said earlier in the show, Art, there are many traditions that give us permission to open to this part of ourselves. And if you believe that something has to be done in a certain way, then that's the way you have to do it, because that's the construct that you have established. Mm-hmm. I can tell you that people will tell you that you can't do, for instance, remote viewing when negative people are around, or you can't do remote viewing when people are physically stressed. And I watched Hella Hamid, one of the great remote viewers, remote viewing a ship that was under the sea that we were trying to locate. I watched her do a remote viewing in the middle of the remote viewing because the sea was very rough. She leaned over the side of the ship, threw up, and then went right back to remote viewing. I watched George McMullen do remote viewing in 114-degree heat in the middle of the Egyptian desert. So the reality that I think is going on is that we set the conditions under which our capacity to open to this aspect of ourselves will function. And when we meet those conditions, then it works. When we don't meet those conditions, it doesn't work. And there are two ways you develop this. You either develop a technique of focus, and it can be a martial art, it can be meditation. That's probably the most significant one, because it teaches a kind of focusing technique. It can be religious.
All right, let me stop you right there.
Sure.
Religious. Water in religion, holy water, baptismal water. In other words, a priest, for example,
yes,
will create intent with respect to water.
Mm-hmm.
And for as long as we've been alive and a lot longer, that's been going on. So obviously there is a religious connection of religious
That's right.
part of faith that believes in the power of water and the intent that can change that water into something very meaningful.
Absolutely. Water has been associated with healing and with religious ceremony for longer than their writing existed. I mean, it dates back to the very, very earliest days of humanity. And the reason it does, I believe, is that these people they did not have technology, and so they developed very acute powers of observation. And they observed that year after year, if you did a certain thing, that it got a certain result, and it was passed on as part of the tradition, the oral tradition, from priest to acolyte or from father to son or whatever it was in that particular culture. And the reason that I think that water becomes associated with all these ceremonies is that water has this particular ability to be altered by conscious intention. I mean, if you look at, for instance, on the 2nd to the 5th of November, I'm doing a conference on water, and I've brought together healers and scientists, people involved with water from all over the world, because it is becoming clear that whether you're talking about homeopathy, in which water is altered, Rustom Roy, the father of nanotechnology, who'll be speaking at the conference, has been doing research on that, or whether you're talking about the crystallization of water that Emoto, the Japanese researcher, has been doing, which Dean Radin at the Noetics Institute has just replicated for the first time under really proper controls. Dean's going to be there. Or whether you're talking about the flow form technology that developed by Schwenk and Schauberger. David Orbach from the Max Planck Institute is going to be coming over to talk about this. However you speak of it, there are all kinds of ways in which consciousness or the manipulation of the environment of water produces this kind of change that we see in the healing water. Can
I make a suggestion for an experiment?
Sure.
Why not take some water that has been blessed by a priest and compare it to a control water?
I was about to tell you that. Douglas Dean, now dead, a wonderful and inventive researcher, a British chemist, did exactly that. He and I had a discussion about this, and he did exactly that. He used water, he had control bottles, and he had water that had been blessed by priests. Now, what he discovered was some, but not all, of the bottles, in fact, did show precisely the change, the same hydrogen bonding change that we observed in the healing study. And that's exactly what you would expect. Some priests hold a much clearer intention. They have a different beingness than other people, and because of their intense focus on their perception of non-local consciousness, and when those kinds of men blessed the water showed change. When people who took it as a sort of meaningless ritual that the church just did it, the water didn't change.
God, that's incredible. That's really incredible. Where do you take the research from here, Stephen?
Well, the next thing that I'm going to be looking at is to really begin to explore this question of how the water in the body changes. Whether this, I'm trying to figure out experimentally how to be able to do this. The difficulty that I've got, or that anybody would have doing an experiment like this, is that the act of taking the measurement, for instance, if we were going to draw blood from people.
I was just going to go there. Why not? Blood is full of water.
The question is, I don't know the answer to this question, but you've got the right question. The question is, will just the act of taking the blood for the measurement cause a change in the bonding relationship? Because people don't like to get stuck, so they have fear reactions.
That's
and you
true.
see that might change. So I'm trying to figure out how one might do this. That's the hard part. I think we now have the right question, though. That's as we said earlier, the problem isn't the answers. It's asking the right questions. It takes a long time to figure out in science how to ask the right question, because you know what you think you're asking, but that's not necessarily what you're really asking. And
yeah, right.
So I'm going to look at that and see whether we can really pin down how therapeutic intent gets into the body. And the other thing I'm interested in looking at, and I'm just now reading the research literature, is this question of, is the healer doing something to you directly, or is there a linkage between your consciousness and the consciousness of the recipient of the therapeutic intent that stimulates their own psychophysical self-regulation response, the same thing that produces the placebo effect?
It would be the latter, I would suspect.
I think it is too, but I think that, but I can't tell you that experimentally.
So then it really does get difficult to proceed to actually nail this down, and I think it can be nailed down. I'm just not sure experimentally how.
Oh, it's hard. I mean, it's, first of all, it's hard to get the money. It's hard to ask the right questions. It's hard to get the people. This is very tough research. I mean, I will tell you, the hardest part for me, Art, is, I wrote this book, Opening to the Infinite, and when I got through with it, I realized I had to rewrite. I mean, I wrote it many times, but I had to rewrite the entire book because when I read it after I'd let it sit for a little while, I realized it was totally mired in time-space language. I mean, the problem we've got with this is very much like the problem that the people in pre-technological societies had, that the only way they could think about non-local consciousness was in spiritual religious terms.
Sure.
Because they just literally did not have the language to ask the question. We're in very much the same place. We have a language which is fixed in time-space. I mean, if you think about the way we talk, it's here, it's there, it's now, it's then. How do you talk about something that doesn't have a time reference and doesn't have a space reference? We know, for instance, in remote viewing, that it is as easy to see something that is close up as it is far away. We know that it's as easy to describe a buried archaeological site as it is to describe a canister that you went out and buried in your backyard today. Mm-hmm. So we know that this aspect of consciousness from experimental data does not operate in the time-space constraints that we normally associate. We know that there are, for instance, healing studies. A study I particularly like that was published in the British Medical Journal by a man who was a skeptic and who actually set out to disprove the reality of healing. And he had people prayed for after they got out of the hospital. And he then went and looked at the records of the people compared to a demographically matched group, and he discovered that those people who were the recipient of prayer, now remember, the prayer is 6 months after they're out of the hospital, those people had less complications, fewer need for drugs, the kind of outcome studies, than the people who were the controls. That means that people were reaching back from the future into the past when it was the present. Not to change it. You can't change the past. But what you can do, based on experimental evidence, is that you can make it come out a certain way in the first instant. And if that's hard to get your head around, it took me 3 days just to figure out how to say that sentence.
Well, and my God, how do you write a book? As you point out,
it's very hard.
You wrote it, and then you had to rewrite it. But when you rewrote it, is it going to be easily digested by people, by neophytes?
Yes, I had to write a book and I gave it to people to read, that an ordinary person with a high school education could read. That was my goal. I wanted something that people could read. I write a lot of technical papers. I speak to the scientific community. I wanted to be able to speak to ordinary people who didn't have technical backgrounds, because I think this subject is so important. I mean, what it's telling us is our consciousness is affecting all the aspects of our reality.
Right. Henry has a very good question from Hawaii. He says, why not do this to the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans? Does the amount of water matter?
No, you need to have about an eyedropper full of water. That's all.
Well, so it does matter.
Well, I mean,
or it doesn't matter. In other words, could you produce the kind of molecular changes you're talking about in an ocean? Well,
that's a very interesting question. If you got 10,000 people to focus on a particular body of water? Could you, in fact, change the water? I don't have an answer to that. I'd love to do the experiment.
Well,
I think I'd start with a pond. I don't know.
Stephen, our oceans right now are in big trouble. We've got about 200 dead zones around the world right now in the world's oceans, and of course they affect everything. Water is life, and if our oceans are in trouble, we're in trouble, and so it's a relevant question.
It's a very relevant question, and by the way, the thing that's really going to kill us is that the oceans are becoming more acidic as a result of the absorption of the water, of the carbon that's in the atmosphere, which is making the water more acidic, the ocean water more acidic, at the same time as the temperature of the water is rising as a result of global warming. Mm-hmm. And those two things are a real double whammy, which are now killing all of the coral reefs around the world. And if you think about that for a second, you realize that if the coral reefs go, the whole ecosystem goes. In the Permian, about 250 million years ago, apparently these exact same circumstances killed off 95% of the life in the ocean. So, yes, this is a very serious problem. You want to talk about conspiracies. The water crisis that is coming down the line like a roaring train, nobody talks about. It's just
no,
amazing.
They don't. We of course we take water for granted, Stephen. We turn on the tap in America,
exactly,
and you can be sure you're going to get nice, clean water. That's not necessarily the truth where I am, by the way. But in America,
that's a synchronicity, Art. I just wrote a column for Explore, the Journal of Science and Healing. I write a regular column for them, and my first sentence was almost exactly word for word what you just said.
Really?
Yes. That's a very interesting little synchronicity right in and of itself. Yeah, that was what struck me.
It is. So, again, it seems to me that there's a wide open field for where your research, where your experimentation could go from here. What a wide field.
Yes, and it's going in a lot of different directions. For instance, David Orbach and Jennifer Green, who are going to speak at this conference on the 2nd to the 5th of November, they have been working with these vortices that were originally described by a man named Victor Schauberger and another man named Schwenk, who was an anthroposophist, a follower of Rudolf Steiner. And they have shown that when you move water through a what's called a flow form, a kind of fountain arrangement in which it produces these vortices, these little sort of like when the toilet flushes, and it forms that circle going down, that's a kind of vortice.
Yes.
That when you produce vortices which match the natural arrangement of water, that it occurs in the natural state when it's flowing in streams, that water produces, for instance, increased growth in plants. It seems to be more healthful. One of the experiments that I did, and I want to do again, is I had a flow form, a kind of this structure where the water flows down, and I put it in a greenhouse, which I split in two, and on one half of the greenhouse I had the flow form, which is like a big slanted thing where the water ran down, and on the other side I just put a gutter at the same slant level, and I took seeds that I broke randomly into two pots and two groups, planted them in the greenhouse. The greenhouse had a plastic wall between the two halves, and I measured the growth of the seeds that were watered by the water of the flow form compared to the water that just went down the gutter, and they were 27% larger. The flow form plants were 27% larger than the regular plants, the control plants.
You really, really are onto something. All right, Stephen, hold tight. We're at the bottom of the hour. I'm Art Bell from the other side of the world, Manila, in the Philippines. This is Coast to Coast AM. Boy, it is coast to coast. And I'm talking about even the coast separated by oceans. Howdy, everybody. Stephen Schwartz is my guest. We're talking about the world of water. And while on the face of it, that might sound a little boring, water? Not at all. not this conversation. What a question I've got from George in Rochester, New York, who says, hey, Art, ask Stephen, we have this evidence that transplanted organs carry memories from the donor to the recipient, and we sure do, don't we? I wonder if this could be memory carried by the moisture, in other words, the water in the organs. We'll ask Stephen about that in a moment. Once again, Stephen Schwartz. Stephen, welcome back. That question is very interesting. Memories carried from the donor to the recipient.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I'd actually never thought about that. But if I were asked to bet, I would bet that indeed it was the water, the fluid inside the cells.
Indeed.
That is carrying this intention. I mean, I'm aware of the literature about people who get hearts and various things, who develop tastes that they never had before, suddenly have cravings for foods they never ate before, that kind of thing.
Or even know the name of their donors.
Yes, there's a lot of stuff. I think that the water may, in fact, be the linkage point. I don't know that. I mean, I can't say that from any experimental evidence. That's a wonderful question. By the way, you've gotten great questions tonight. The guy from Hawaii about changing the ocean, that really was a very interesting. And this one
by the way, while we're on the subject of the ocean, pretty much, if you take a look, the North Pole is melting. I mean, literally, the North Pole is melting. It's changing the salinity of the water near it.
Absolutely.
And, if water is such a big factor as we think it is, I'm sorry, if water is as big a factor as we think it is, then surely ice at the north entire part of the world changing into water is going to be significant.
It's going to be a huge effect. It's causing a change in the pH of the water. It's going to raise the water. It's going to dilute. Part of the result of diluting the salinity of the water is the breakdown of the world ocean current that carries, for instance, warm water up along France and England and Scotland. That's right. And they may experience in this era of coming global warming, they may get warmer, and then if this current breaks down, they will suddenly get much colder. The breaking up of the Larsen B ice shelf, for instance, which occurred in 2002, was a chunk of ice as big as Rhode Island.
I know. They thought it would go very slowly. It went all at once.
It is going up, by some estimates, as much as 5 times as fast as was originally predicted. This is a huge crisis that is coming down the track toward us.
All right. Well, that brings up politics then. You think that water even affects politics, history itself?
Oh, I think water is destiny. I think in this century, water is going to be far more important than petroleum. For instance, I'll give you an example. Right now, approximately 1 in 3, one-third of the people in the world have some measure of water scarcity. When the glaciers that are in the Himalayas melt, as they are doing, 2.5 billion people will be thrown into water crisis. To give you a more American example, the Glacier National Park in Kalispell, Montana, which is famous for its glaciers and the beautiful lakes and meadows and all that, there will be no glaciers, it is now predicted, by 2030. So if you plan to take your kids out to see a glacier in the United States, you better do it pretty quick, because it ain't going to be there much longer.
That's right. I remember an advertiser that I had years ago, Stephen, and it was very, very interesting. It was a sort of a clamped-on, very, very powerful magnet. And what you did, you clamped these magnets on the input water to your home, wherever your water came from, whether it was a city or a well or whatever. And it would change in some way as the water flowed past the magnetic field. It would change the water molecules in a way that I can't articulate right now and I can't recall. But it did have a big effect on the water. All of a sudden, your water spigots and so forth and so on wouldn't have this collection of white, I guess, salt or whatever it is. It would dissolve into the water in a way that just flowed out and didn't get stuck on things. It was really strange, but it worked.
Well, there are a number of see, that's the thing about water. It's so labile. It's so susceptible to change at so many levels, not just chemically, but as we've been saying, from therapeutic intention or just intention in general, that and it's in homeopathic preparations, for instance, all those kinds of things. Water clearly has, maybe because a majority of our body is made up of water, that may be part of it, but water has some capacity to operate with these linkages that we've been describing. And exactly how this works is not clear, but that it does work can be experimentally demonstrated.
You're damn right. Stephen, going back to one of the crazy experiments that I did with my audience years ago, we created rain in areas where there was absolutely no forecast for rain. In fact, there had been drought, unrelenting, horrible drought. And I had my audience for long periods of time, millions of people literally, concentrate on creating moisture, concentrate on trying to create clouds, moisture, clouds, rain. It worked.
Well,
I don't know
you
if
remember Wilhelm Reich.
Do you recall those experiments? Did you hear about them?
I saw cloudbusters. I used to know a guy named Trevor Constable that made cloudbusters, and I also, do you remember, Art, the guy who was called the Hurricane Man, who threatened baseball teams with rainouts unless they paid him money, and some of the teams did pay him? Do you remember him?
I know baseball teams are very superstitious. I don't recall him, but I can imagine.
Well, he would concentrate on moving hurricanes to land. And years ago, when I met this guy, a guy named Jeff Mishlove wrote a book about him, documenting some of his stuff. It was really it's called Lightning Man, Storm Man. Anyway, Jeff Mishlove, people can find it.
He wouldn't live long down in Louisiana.
Yeah, and I knew a woman here in Virginia Beach, Eula Allen, who organized groups to pray to send healing to the weather system when he was doing that. And she showed me at the time, this is one of the things that got me interested in water, a track in which every time this guy said, I'm going to move the storm onshore to Baltimore, I think it was, she would organize people all over the country to focus on it keeping out to sea. And this storm zigged and zagged back. And at the time, newspapers commented on what a crazy path the storm had. So is it possible that people could produce rain, for instance? Well, the Hopis believe so. And the Tibetans believe so.
Absolutely.
So
again, though, coming back, how can water affect politics? That's quite a reach.
No. 2.5 billion people don't have water. What do you think's going to happen? They're going to pour over the borders. I mean, if you look at the current political situation in North Korea, what the Chinese are doing is they have a very pragmatic point of view. They don't care if the North Korean regime is despotic and treats its people terribly. What they don't want is millions of North Koreans streaming across their border to press them. What do you think's going to happen, for instance, in Gaza, which is sucking out the groundwater, the deep fossil water that does not get replaced? They're pumping it out at about twice the rate that they ought to be. And when that water is gone, where do you think those people are going to go? The wars are going to be fought over water. Look at what's going on in the southwestern United States with the droughts that are going on. These droughts produce dry forests, which create more wildfires. Look at the Colorado River, for instance, the fights that are going on over who's going to get the water.
That's true.
Which group of special interests are going to be able to get access to that? Water is destiny.
It's true. So there's the answer to the question. It certainly is political, and eventually it's going to be water wars. That's been predicted for a number of years, that there would be wars about water.
Oh,
I
I
can
think,
see it happening.
Let me give you another one. It takes 1,000 tons of water to grow a ton of grain. So when grain moves around the world, what's really moving around the world is water. And when that water is not available to grow that grain, what's going to happen? There are huge, huge problems that are coming along. As the ice melts, the current predictions are that if the ice sheets completely melt, that the sea will rise 21 feet.
Mm-hmm.
They are now talking that by the end of this century, it will rise 3 feet. Now, that doesn't sound like very much, but if you hold your hand 3 feet off the ground, and you imagine that the water is now that deep, and you see a plane going out in all directions, you will be astonished at how much of it covers. I mean, I live in Virginia Beach, and I live on the water, and if the water came up 3 feet, my living room would be a swimming pool.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's...
You live in Manila, for instance.
That's
the Philippines are going to be devastated by the rise in seawater.
No question about it. I can see the water from my window, and 3 feet would probably put it at the base of my building.
Yes, you'd be doing the show in a bathing suit.
All of this is absolutely incredible. What would you imagine the rise in sea level, the rise in water in the world as the melting continues would produce, other than the displacement, obviously, of people, as we just talked about at the coast? That much more water and the change of the pH and the change in the salinity of the water, I wonder what that would bring with it.
Well, it's going to bring with it. I mean, I'll give you one that really got my attention. In Canada, as a result of global warming and the melting of the sea ice, and the Inuit, what they call First Americans, they have just recently lowered the price of electricity in the northern provinces because the Eskimos are all having to buy air conditioners. Because, it's like selling an icebox to an Eskimo.
Yeah.
They're buying them.
Air conditioners. That one I hadn't heard. I had heard that polar bears are beginning to drown because they have no ice to get onto. I've heard the Inuits are beginning to move because they recognize that what was their land is going to be, or is now beginning to go underwater, and they're not going to be able to stay there any longer.
There are robins flying in the spring in the Arctic. They're growing broccoli and Chinese cabbage and cauliflower in Greenland. They've just planted the first olive groves in southern England. Olive groves in Devonshire.
Well, all right. Again, what you're doing is incredibly important. The experiments you're doing are important. Getting it documented, moving it into the mainstream scientific community is really important. And how do we do that?
Well, I'm holding a conference because I want people. There's nothing that people can get a handle on about the whole picture of this. When you read about it, first of all, you hardly hear anything. We're so enraptured by Madonna's adoption that almost nothing else can get into the popular media. I mean, if it weren't for interviews like this one, I don't know who would be talking about it. So, I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to get a chance to talk about this. There is so little coverage that part of it is just getting people to realize that water is not the birthright you thought it was, something you turn on the tap and it always comes out, that it is, in fact, one of the most important issues that we are going to face and that our children are going to face. Imagine what this world is going to look like for our children at the end of this century, with water up 3 feet, with the coral reefs dead, the food stock, the fishing stocks destroyed because the ecosystems have collapsed. I mean, this gets very apocalyptic, and that's the conservative view.
It really is. We've had the impression that we could take our waste products, our factories' waste products, and our human waste products, and simply dump them in the water, and all would be fine. It would simply sort of disperse, and there would not be an effect. Well, 200 dead spots in the ocean are beginning to tell us that might not be so.
Oh, let me give you another one. We are dumping pharmaceuticals that come out of the waste product of chicken and pig farms and that are put onto crops that are washing down into the water and are producing androgynous fish and mussels that don't look like anything anybody has ever seen before. Mm-hmm. The pollutants that we just don't even think about, we just put them in the water, are having an effect on the entire ecosystem. We have got to wake up to this. I mean, we need to stop being worried about, did the government put explosives in the World Trade Towers, and instead start focusing on what the hell's coming out of the water on my tap, and what's going to happen to my kids when they try to go down to the beach, and where am I going to get healthful food and have sufficient water to be able to just survive.
They're also noticing, by the way, Stephen. Yeah, they're also beginning to notice, Stephen, that fish are changing sex.
Yes.
Mysteriously, and for some unknown reason, there's a feminization going on of the fish. It's weird.
That's right. It's very, very serious stuff. And so I have changed my focus from other research. I mean, I'm still continuing the remote viewing research and will continue that because I find it very useful. You know, once I did a show with you about 5 years ago, I guess it was, on the 2050 project, of getting people to remote view 2050. And much of what they told me, and I don't want to say too much about it because people actually do this experiment and they might be listening and that would cue them, but I can tell you that the 2050s all are concerned about water. It's just the hard part for Americans is we have so long had decent water systems compared to most of the rest of the world that we just really don't think about it. You know, you go down to the beach at the ocean and you turn on your tap or you turn on your laundry machine or whatever, and everything just kind of works.
Well, I can tell you, living here in the Philippines, I live in a building where we have a processing plant for water. But other than specifically where I live, my friend, what you see walking around the streets are Filipinos with bottled water everywhere in their hands because the water is marginally not drinkable.
Right. Well, that's true of most of the world.
Yes, it is.
And when these, for instance, when the Himalayan glaciers melt and 2.5 billion people suddenly don't have good drinking water, or when the water is not available in parts of the Middle East, we're going to have wars and huge population movements.
Yeah, I wonder how long it's going to be
now.
How long in the Middle East before this reaches crisis proportion? Not very long, I think.
No, it's not very long at all. I mean, that's part of the problem with this is that because we haven't really been paying much attention, it's coming up on us. I mean, we're talking in the 20 to 30 year range. So enough time that we might be able to do something, but not so much time that we can afford to have any indulgences about this.
All right, Stephen. I've held you now for a couple of hours to myself. What I'm going to do is open the phone lines when we get back, and I know a lot of you are electrified by this because I certainly am. Stephen Schwartz is my guest. We're discussing water and human intent on water. He described experiments at the beginning of the program, first hour of the program, that without any shadow of a doubt prove human intent on water has a gigantic effect. I'm Art Bell. Here I am. My guest is electrifying. His name is Stephen Schwartz, and we're talking about water. Actually, consciousness and water. If you have a relevant question, we've sure had a lot of good Fast Blast questions. If you have something you'd like to ask in person, we are at your disposal. Those are the numbers, the conduits to Stephen Schwartz coming right up. If there's better talk radio, I have no idea where you're going to find it. Stephen, welcome back. Are you ready for the audience?
Sure.
All right, then here they come. First-time caller line, you're on the air with Stephen Schwartz.
Good evening, Art and Stephen Schwartz.
Hi.
Art, I know I wanted to make a comment and a quick question, please. If I could just say, I had someone shared some DMT with me one time, and it was in a very lit environment. And the spirit during that experience had conveyed to me that light wasn't unique and that water was unique. And I never understood what that might have meant. And then a few weeks ago, you had that crop circle researcher on, and he was indicating how that the crops formations seem to be drawn towards these underwater aquifers.
That's right.
And I just can't help wonder if, with Dr. Hameroff indicating the quantum realm that maybe the DMT allowed you to explore, for water to be relevant there.
It does come together, buddy. There's no question about it. Do you have a question?
I just wanted to ask Dr. Schwartz if he kind of thought that there was a mental component to all of these observational experiences.
I'm not sure I quite understand your question. A mental component in what way? Can you unpack that a little bit for me?
Okay. If we have our brain allows us to observe or even cause possibly the effects with those healers doing their healing, I just can't help wonder if, like we say with the crop circle phenomena, is there a chance that there's something that's at the core of our existence, and if water is in all of us and seems to be at the core of life, if through our brain and the water are we trying to communicate something to ourselves?
Okay. Well, I'm not sure that therapeutic intention or these consciousness effects, the brain obviously plays a role in this, but this is not, so far as we know yet anyway. Now, subsequent research may change this, but we have not isolated a part of the brain that is particularly involved with non-local consciousness, although there has been some research that was done by researchers I can't think of the name right now, but in any case, who have discovered a part of the brain that fires off using MRI when people have insights. And insights, I think, are very closely related to intuitional insights as well. So it may be that there is a particular function of the brain, but this aspect of non-local consciousness, I'm not sure that this is in the brain. I think that, for instance, if you look at the near-death research or the various kinds of survival research or the reincarnational research that's been done by Dr. Ian Stevenson and Dr. Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia, you will see that for these kinds of phenomena to exist, there must be some aspect of us which survives, which is not linked just to the body. And that non-local aspect of ourselves may indeed be linked with all other, actually I think it is, with all other organisms. As I said earlier tonight, the research to me is saying that all consciousness is interlinked and interdependent, from the single-celled organism all the way up to the high-order mammals. And I say that because research has shown the ability of people through intention alone to affect the growth of plants, the breakup of blood cells, the growth of cell colonies. I mean, almost everything you can think of, people have tried successfully. That's the point, successfully. And so it's possible that, crops, all sorts of things, also have water, and that it may be that this linkage is stimulated through some manipulation of the water. That's possible. That's pure speculation. We don't know that yet. But that's why this kind of research is important to do.
Okay, good enough. First-time caller line, Paul in New Jersey. You're on the air with Stephen Schwartz. Hi.
Hi, Art. It's a pleasure to talk to you. First-time caller, long-time listener. It's an honor. Stephen, your guest is very interesting. My basic question was sort of what the last caller asked, but I'd like a more specific AIDS, HIV, hepatitis, all these diseases coming out recently, the increase in cancer rates. Could that have anything to do with, like, the lessened water quality with the glaciers melting, maybe something like that?
Uh-huh.
Well, it's certainly there's no question that pollution in water. I mean, Art and I were describing earlier what's happening, for instance, to fish and mussels and oysters who are exposed to the pollutants, and if the fish and the oysters and the crabs are being affected, the people that drink the water from those water sources, I mean, they're being affected as well. So there's no question that pollution in our water is causing effects on our systems, just as we can see these same effects occurring in fish and crabs and even in birds whose shells don't form properly, for instance. So there's a great deal of evidence that suggests that the purity of water has a very strong effect on the health and well-being of the creatures who partake of that water.
All right. Heather in Seattle, Washington, you're on with Stephen Schwartz.
Hi. I have a very serious water retention problem. I've been to medical doctors. I've been to herbal specialists. And I have two questions. I want to know, one, is it possible that my thoughts are creating this problem? And two, if they are, and they're kind of like subconscious beliefs, what can I do to help myself?
Well, I don't want, it's very hard. It's very tempting to make these one-to-one linkages of if I do this, I get this. I think it's much more complex than that. However, I would suggest this to you, just to see what happens. Put a little pad of paper and a pencil next to your bed and say to yourself every night when you go to bed, tonight I'm going to have a dream which I will understand that will give me insight on my water retention problem. And you just ask yourself, you may have to do it every night, might have to do it for a dozen nights. Probably not, but you might. And write down, even if it's a single word in the morning, that whatever you remember, if it's just as much as a word, and you do keep doing that, and you will open a dialogue with your own unconscious that may provide some very useful information to you.
All right.
Famous scientists have used, Robert Louis Stevenson used to say that the gremlins of his mind gave him his stories. Jonas Salk is on record as saying that he considered sleep and dreams to be one of his principal research techniques.
All right. Wildcard line 3, Kim in Canada somewhere. You're on the air with Stephen Schwartz.
Good evening. Kim from Edmonton. Art, I come bearing comment and question.
Okay.
And excellent work. Stefan, I guess it is, right?
Yep.
Right. Just a quick little background. I'm currently studying biophotonics, homeopathy, and electrosonic water programming. And first, quick comment. Just wanted to alleviate some fear. There's no real need to war on water. Just so people know out there, if they want to invest in something, atmospheric water condensers are an excellent thing to put in your house, and they're available now.
Yes,
next question about memory and organs, the memory and the organ transplant. Seth, and this leads to the question, Seth mentions, along with some masters, but Seth mentions that it's stored in the cellular membrane. And, okay, here's the question, which comes kind of from Seth. I wanted to ask you if you had looked into spiritual material for answers to some of your questions, and to lead off from that, because one of them was the healing action you're not sure about. And some of our physics would describe it as spintronic interaction, which is why it's hard to measure, because that needs charge blocking devices. But that is something that Seth even talks about past healing effects, and I noticed you talked about that. So, again, the question, have you studied spiritual material matters? You might want to look into Seth.
I actually knew Jane Roberts, and I have read the Seth material and the Bailey material and the Casey material and the Steiner material and lots of it. Yes, I have a very great respect for what I think of as the ethno-historical spiritual traditions of many people. I think there's only one mountain in town, and it's an illusion, so how you get up it is really largely a matter of personal taste. That's one thing. The other thing I wanted to say was that the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency has just given a rather large grant to a company that called Agua Sciences, which pulls water out of air. And it may be that and it'll do it in almost any climate, even in deserts. And they're using this. They're going to be using this in Iraq if we end up still staying there, God forbid. But in any case, it may be that in the future the American household will have some kind of a device which is literally pulling the water out of the air.
Well, there's lots of questions about air quality, too. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Stephen Schwartz. Hello. West of the Rockies, now or never. Yes, you. Yes.
How you doing? All right, my name is Michael. I live in Las Vegas. I'm listening to Stephen here tonight. Everything you said tonight, Stephen, is right on the money as far as I'm concerned. Ever since the advent of bottled water, I've been telling everybody I know that in the long run, I believe oil is not going to be the thing that's going to this earth. Water is going to be the thing.
Yeah.
I lived in Tacoma, Washington for 25 years. Year after year, Mount Rainier reputedly has the biggest snowfall anywhere else on the planet, besides the Himalayas maybe. And 2 years ago, I fly home. I see no snow on the Cascades. All the ski areas are closed. We are killing the planet, aren't we?
Yep.
I mean, we really are.
We are. Let me just give you just a couple of quickies. I mentioned Glacier National Park in Montana. But, for instance, think about Yosemite. 3.5 million people a year go out there. And the acreage, they now predict that because of drought and the drying of the forests as a result of the drought, that the acreage burn will rise by 50% in 2050. These fires that we see on television that just blaze away, we're going to see more and more of them. And Rainier, you're going to see the disappearance of snow. On Mount Kilimanjaro, they're now saying that perhaps in as little as 15 years, there will be no snow on Mount Kilimanjaro. So if you want to see it, you better go. Just like I said, if you want to see the glaciers in Montana, you better go out there because they're not going to be there much longer.
Okay, east of the Rockies, Brandon in North Carolina, you're on the air with Stephen Schwartz.
Art, good evening. Stephen, good evening. Your shows are just amazing, Art. I've been listening to you for about 4 months now. I work third shift security, and like a truck driver say, it keeps me awake, and it's quality entertainment. Your guests are all mind-blowing. I just have a quick question for you. I'll let you get to the rest of your guests. Form of control, mind control of water, as you're saying, I was thinking as a different form of manipulation towards people who can move objects with their minds, such as levitation. Could you use water in your body as the form of manipulation to maybe create levitation in your own self?
The levitation part I don't know about. Can you affect the structure of the water in your own body? Yes, I believe that is part of what happens in the healing process. And I think we're going to get a much deeper insight into that as we go along. The levitation part, that I can't comment on because I don't know anything about it.
Okay. Wildcard line from Illinois, you're on the air.
Hello, Art, and how are you tonight?
Just fine.
Good question. The weather in the central United States, basically near Oswego, Illinois, or west of Chicago here, it's just been unusually, and I mean unbelievably wet. I talked to you about 8 weeks ago. I told you we've had more water here than we've ever had on record. And now it's continuing. I mean, this is supposed to be the dry season up until about November. That's when the rain's supposed to start. It's getting bad. My question is, does he see it coming even worse? And I'll take the answer off the air. Thank you.
Again, the kinds of things that I have been talking about tonight, all of these things are based in research. I don't really have a lot of speculation.
Yeah, you're not a weatherman.
I'm not a weatherman, but what I will tell you is this. The models that have been done suggests that some parts of the United States are going to become much wetter, and other parts, the Southwest, for instance, are going to become much, much drier. And we already have a significant drought going on in large parts of the West. So there are going to be places that are going to be much wetter and warmer, and some of the climatologists and hydrologists who are looking at these issues believe that the northern states are going to become in weather very much like the central states are now. The central states will become like the southern states, and the southern states on the East Coast will become sort of subtropical, much more like Latin America, I guess, parts of, and that, of course, as the water rises, that parts of Florida, I mean, if you go to the University of Arizona, there's a website that they've got where you can actually see models of what the advancing rising water is going to be like, and you can see that by the time you get to the 21 feet that they're talking about, which is centuries away, although I will say that they originally said it'll be 1,000 years before this happens. Then they said it'll be 500 years, and now you see people talking about 200 and 300 years. So it isn't clear to me, I don't think it's clear to anybody exactly how fast this is coming, except that it is speeding up exponentially in ways that we had not anticipated. So It may be that you're going to be in a very wet area.
All right. Very quickly, maybe. Clay in Florida, you're on with Stephen Schwartz. Hello.
Hi. I've got kind of a question scenario. If we have the dead zones in the oceans, would it be possible to pump oxygen in like a big aquarium? And would this be a good reality check for the world since everybody's not paying attention to the problem?
Well, that is actually an interesting question. Of course, it's partly oxygen starvation, Stephen, that's causing these dead zones. Right. And I don't know, could you pump oxygen into large... I don't know.
Interestingly enough, there are people who are beginning to think about what the emergency scenario is. And it's quite interesting. Paul Crutzen, for instance, who won the Nobel Prize in 1995 for his work on the ozone layer, is really the man that defined a great deal of what we know about the ozone layer, which is, by the way, bigger. It was supposed to be healing. It turns out it's actually gotten bigger, the hole. But he has now begun proposing that we release sulfur dust in the upper atmosphere because that will help reflect back the sunlight so that it will help ameliorate the global warming problem. So, I mean, it sounds preposterous, but it was based on the eruption of Mount Pinatubo that blew up in 91.
Sure. And that
spewed sulfur particles into the atmosphere and caused a reduction of temperature. So there are people, it was about 0.5 degree centigrade. So, I mean, it's not a small, it's a small but significant difference. There are now people that are talking about things like pumping oxygen into the water.
All right, Stephen, hold it right there. We're at the bottom of the hour. Preposterous? Possibly, but so are the magnitude of the problems. I'm Art Bell, coming to you from a country where they turn back time. Hi, everybody. Stephen Schwartz is my guest, and what a program this has been. It's been all about water. You wouldn't think it'd be hot stuff, as they say, but it certainly has been, hasn't it? Hey, listen, if you would like to contact me, there's a way to do that, thanks to the Internet. I'm Art Bell at mindspring.com. That's ARTBELL at Mindspring, MINDSPRING, mindspring.com, or, well, conversely, artbell at AOL.com. Both of them will work. Mindspring has slightly larger capacity for messages, so I suggest that one. Stephen Schwartz has a book. You might want to read all about it, as they say. We'll talk about that in a moment. Once again, Stephen Schwartz. Stephen, you have a book out right now, right?
No, it's about to come out.
About to come out. Okay.
Yes, Opening to the Infinite, which talks about what I know about non-local consciousness and also teaches you that protocols for remote viewing, including intuitive diagnosis and healing, And I also have a series of DVDs called the Gold Standard Course, which not only presents my material, but also the material of every founder, or essentially every founder, from Ingo Swann to Hal Puthoff, Russell Targ, that are all put together in one unified course that will teach remote viewing in all of its aspects, so that people who have interest in healing, or people who have interest in how it relates to religion or how it relates to physics, can all get information on this. So,
okay, and the name of the book?
The book is called Opening to the Infinite, and the DVDs are called the Gold Standard Course.
How soon for the book?
The book will be out in about, I think about 5 to 6 weeks. We're planning a launch in January, and so, in fact, I'm going to be back on your show sometime in January to talk about it, and I think it will answer a lot of the questions that people have been asking, because I've spent a lot of time, I've rewritten this book several times trying to keep accommodating this idea of non-local consciousness, and that some part of us is outside of time-space.
All right. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Stephen Schwartz. Hello.
Hi, Art. Hi, Stephen. This is Eric calling from Spirit, California. I had a quick comment I'd like to make about something he made much earlier in the show.
Sure.
About consciousness being interconnected and interdependent.
Yes.
If that's the case, individual consciousness would have to survive death, because if they're all interconnected, losing one would lose all of it.
Well, that's actually an interesting thought. I hadn't thought of it that way, but clearly there is this, in Jung called it the collective unconscious. In Asia, they talk about the Akashic record. Mm-hmm. The Egyptians had a concept of this collective idea. Clearly, all consciousnesses seem to be interlinked and interdependent. I mean, if you think about it, how does an archetype get created? We talk about Joseph Campbell's The Hero of 1,000 Faces. Well, how do these archetypes get created? They get created because of thousands and thousands of individual acts of awareness and observation in a focused state, and we all come to recognize them. That's why they're archetypes.
Okay. East of the Rockies, conserving time, JK in Texas. You're on the air with Stephen Schwartz.
Steve, let me throw 3 terms at you. Have you studied hysteria and its involvement with red tide and confined animal feedlot operations?
I am aware of the red tide stuff. I have certainly read a number of research papers on it, and I know about the confined animal problem. I'm not quite sure which aspect of it you're talking about.
Red tide is caused too much animal chemical.
That's right. Too much animal
chemicals and animal waste. Are you familiar with hysteria? Pfisteria.
Hysteria. I'm sorry, I misunderstood you.
Hysteria. Art, you ever heard of it?
Yes.
Well, yes, I have.
Hysteria. Okay, it happened in North Carolina. It caused some red tide. That's you ought to be concerned with the incidence of that.
Well, it's kind of part of the larger picture.
Huh? Well, see, what's happening, there's too many hogs and chickens growing in the United States. There's a problem of disposing with all the manure from these animals, and they had an international conference at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, Arkansas, a few years ago, talking about what to do with all this chicken litter, as they call it, chicken manure, what to do with it. You can only use about 2 tons per acre per year, and how to dispose of it. It's getting in our water systems and causing red tide and pollution, over-nitrating the water.
Yep.
Have you
killing the Chesapeake Bay?
Yeah, I'm absolutely aware of it, and it's part of the bigger picture that we've been talking, exactly what we've been talking about, right, Stephen?
That's right. Precisely
Okay.
this. I mean, I live on the Chesapeake Bay, and there's a whole plume of the bay that has been killed off because of the intense farming operations, animal husbandry, chicken husbandry, along the rivers that feed into the Chesapeake Bay. It's just awful.
Andy in Los Angeles, you're on with Stephen Schwartz.
Hi, Art. Hi, Stephen. Hope you're having a great day. Stephen, have you ever heard of an inventor from Austria by the name of Johann Grander, who received a major award from the Soviet Academy of Sciences for his energy stick, which has been sold throughout the world and would take regular water, or what you would call dead water from a dead zone, and put life back into it and create living water? Have you ever heard of Johann Grander?
I have heard the name, and I've had a conversation once with somebody, but no, I don't have any specific knowledge about him.
Okay, briefly, what they found was that people who had various ailments of different types, who took water in whatever the respective country and treated it with these energy sticks, many of them had phenomenal healings take place where their health was restored and where doctors gave them no hope. And I hope that if you get a chance, you check that name, Johann Grander. He would be up in years right now. I don't know if he's still alive, but his energy stick was being sold in Los Angeles as recently as the last 8 to 10 years.
Okay.
Well, I will look into it, and I thank you.
Okay. Let's see how many we can get through here. First-time caller line, David from California. You're on the air with Stephen Schwartz.
Yeah, hi, Art. Great program. I'm all about water. Just a comment and then a question about the conference. But the comment had to do with earlier this evening, you had a gentleman that asked the question, could you cure the oceans? And Stephen's response was, that's a great question. Let's look in, or we should look into it. And I'd like to point out that Masaru Emoto and an international group of people had gathered at Fujiwara Dam, which was a polluted reservoir, lake, something of that nature. And I guess, Steve, you're familiar with what Masaru Emoto does?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, Dean Radin, who's just replicated his work, will be speaking at my conference.
Right. So, you know that the tangible manifestation is the crystalline structure.
Right.
So what they found was that they took a sample of water before their blessing, and this was a group of people who gathered together, an international group actually, who got together and blessed the water at this dam. And they took a sample before the blessing and a sample after the blessing. And if you do a quick search for Message of Water or Masaru Emoto or whatever, you can find the pictures of those crystalline structures. And before the blessing, it was aqueous mass of nothingness. And after the blessing, it was this beautiful crystal that we would think that a snowflake would look like, or that purity of water would look like. So I just wanted to make that comment, and maybe, you know, in your pursuit, you could follow up with perhaps what they're doing.
No, I think he's very, very intimately familiar with that work, right?
Yes, I'm quite familiar. The problem that the Emoto work has always had is that Emoto, not being a scientist in a traditional sense, his research didn't have the kind of careful controls. But Dean Radin, who's up at Noetics Institute in Petaluma, California, has done a replication of his work with Emoto's cooperation, in which they had 2,000 people focus what beautiful thoughts is the way it's described by Emoto, and then they looked at the difference between control crystals done with control water and the crystals that were produced from the water that was the focus of the treatment. And that water was in a sealed, what's called a Faraday cage, a kind of structure that filters out all electromagnetic radiation, but extreme low frequency. And the water looked more beautiful, the crystals of the treated water, than the control samples. And this is really the first independent validation of the Emoto work. And Dean is going to be presenting the paper explaining this for the first time at the conference in November.
Okay. Marina in Lake Forest, California asks if any of your experiments involved or compared distilled water.
Yes. We used in the healing experiment that I described, and by the way, that paper, infrared changes in the infrared spectrum in water proximate to the palms of therapeutic practitioners. I'm sorry, it's a research paper. People who go to my personal website, which is on the Coast to Coast website, can download that paper. That water was triple distilled, bacterially static, hermetically sealed water.
Okay. Wildcard line 4 from Salt Lake City, Utah. Max, you're on the air with Stephen Schwartz.
Hello, Trey. What you said earlier about the ozone hole is actually getting bigger. I'm looking at the NASA website right now, and it's shrinking on schedule. It's about average, but it had its peak on September 30th.
Well, I will tell you, hold on, let me see. I'll give you the reference if I can get to it quickly enough. Or you can write me. Why don't you do that, and I'll send you the latest reference that I've got.
Yeah, I've got a good map up there right now. Very recent map up there at the moment. On the international line, Clark, you're on the air with Stephen Schwartz.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Stephen.
Yes.
Or a couple of points quickly. The glaciers on the western slope of the Canadian Rockies are growing, and the ones on the eastern side, they're shrinking.
That's right.
Other thing, we did a lot of study and looked at a lot of Tibetan practices, and one practice that jumped out at us was by meditation, a certain meditation, that you could somehow affect the structure or the very nature of matter. Now that you have mindfulness, beautiful thoughts, prayer, intention, are they not similar mind forms that might indicate that, non-locality of consciousness within ourselves might indicate that we're kind of part of, we have a pan-dimension beyond ourselves?
Yes.
And that when you look at matter being essentially breaking down our molecules, breaking down atoms, breaking down atomic particles, that we end up with information and energy and how they're organized. Can we not, maybe through resonance of our minds, affect that?
Well, I mean, the research would suggest that we can. The point that you made in the early part of your question about the various different ways this is described is the point I was trying to make earlier this evening, in which I said, there are a lot of ways of describing this, and each spiritual teaching develops its own way of expressing this. And what's interesting to me is if you look across all of them, you can see that it's the same concept, only people at different times coming from different cultures, focused on different aspects of it, each have their own way of describing it, but it is the same thing. The Tibetan meditation techniques that you're talking about are very similar to other kinds of techniques that have developed in other cultures. Native Americans have a tradition of this. The Hopi have a tradition about this. There are shamanic traditions that come out of Latin America about this. We are all seeing the same stuff. That's the thing, is that people have these experiences and they depend on their vocabulary to try to express what they've seen, and their vocabulary is structured by their culture. And if the culture is different, then the language is different. But it is all the same kind of perception.
All right. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Stephen Schwartz. Hi.
Hello? Art?
Dave? Yes.
Yeah. Hey, this is great. Hey, I really missed the Dreamland and the harp music. My question is basically when he spoke about the sulfur sprinkling here in Wisconsin, basically right after they started burning the oil wells in Iraq during the Gulf War, we didn't really experience any type of a summer. It was cold and rainy here from April almost all the way to August till we finally got a regular part of our season, our summer. And I was just wondering maybe if the burning of the oil wells had anything to do with...
Well, Dave, you're kind of asking the wrong guy. Again, he's not a weatherman. So I'm just going to save that question from you unless you really want to answer it, Stephen.
Well, the only thing I would say is that there was a lot of discussion at the time of the 91 Iraq War about whether the burning of the oil wells, what their exact effect on the weather is. But I do note, and I mentioned the Mount Pinatubo explosion in 91, which reduced the temperature in the following year by about 0.5 degree centigrade.
Correct. Okay, west of the Rockies, Jerry in Arizona, you're on with Stephen Schwartz.
Yeah, how are you guys doing tonight?
Fine.
Doing good.
Okay. Listen, George Norrie had a gentleman on his program, and he had written a book, and the title had something to do with magic. And he had made some kind of a little motor or something, and he put it like a couple thousand miles apart. And I guess what this did, it would put some kind of energy into a room, and he was able to change the pH in water, which they tested over thousands of miles. I wondered if you heard anything about that.
Can you say a little more about that? I didn't quite have enough information to respond.
Yeah, they made some kind of a little motor or something where they would kind of put their consciousness into this motor, and then they set it all around the country. In fact, I think they even put it overseas, and they were able to concentrate on that, and that would send a signal to change the pH in water, and it didn't matter how far away it was.
Okay, I think...
no, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I think that it wouldn't matter whether the machine was there or not. I think what we've been talking about is consciousness and intention. So one can imagine it occurred that way, machine or no. Richmond, Virginia, you're on the air with Stephen Schwartz. Hi.
Okay, I just have to be brief.
Yes.
Two things to possibly be a solution. One is the prayer thing that you have done in the past. The law of intentional consequences would not be a problem, because all we're trying to do is reverse and make it the bad stuff back into good the way nature had intended it. So that the bleaching of the coral, the dead spots, is a great big dead spot in the Chesapeake Bay, about 100 miles, I think it is. You're familiar with that, Steve?
I'm sorry, I've got to cut you off there. We're out of time. All of that is a possibility and something to think about. Stephen, we are out of time. It has been an incredible program. And, of course, we will have you back. As you mentioned, it's already planned. So thank you for being here, and you have a wonderful night, partner.
It was a pleasure to talk to you again, Art, and you have a great evening, and thanks for having me on as a guest.
Good night. All right, folks, that's it. What a program it was. What a last, I had 3 days, didn't I? It's been a long time since I had 3 days in a row from Manila in the Philippines, Southeast Asia. Good day to you all. Good night.